Hello and welcome to Lutherans Alive. This is the program that seeks to tell the stories of Lutheran Christians and our ministries here in Southwestern Pennsylvania. We believe that God has done wonderful things for us and is doing wonderful things through us. I'm Pastor Tony Schneck, the host of the program, and very pleased to welcome back to the program a gentleman who seems to have become one of our regular guests, and we're very pleased at that. Pastor Dutch Weber is back with us today. Dutch, welcome to the program. Dutch is a retired pastor in our synod and a resident of the passive and retirement community in Zelienople, Pennsylvania. And you have been given an assignment, a somewhat daunting task for today's program, in that you've been asked to offer some advice to younger pastors like myself and even those who are younger. So let's start perhaps by talking about what is it that we pastors have promised to do in our ordination vows as a part of the ordination service.
Advice is always something that is not always well received because we all think we know everything. But Samuel Coleridge once said that advice is like snow. The softer it falls, the longer it makes some sense because it's going to sink into the ground like this sinks into the mine. We need to profit from advice from time to time or readjust ourselves to things that are happening in the ministry. If a person doesn't want any advice, then they're not going to be helped very much. Benjamin Franklin made that very clear one time. So I'll start at a place where it drove me right to the Book of Concord. Now that sounds very daunting, and it was interesting because I speed read the Book of Concord in one evening. That doesn't make sense, but when you speed read, you're simply going to major points along the way. And it brought back a lot of memories of how we studied that under our professors at seminary, and what that meant in terms of realizing what the office of the ministry is. You always need to start at the bottom to build a good foundation. This is the ministry, the office of word and sacrament. We just need to be reminded of that because sometimes the pressure of everyday duties in our work each week doesn't allow us sometimes to think of what the real nubbing of this office is, to preach and teach and have the discipline of baptism and the wonderful offering of confirmation, and then that powerful way of being strengthened Sunday after Sunday with the word and the sacrament. Well, this is where I needed to start, and the Lutheran confessions speak to that, of course. Martin Luther spent a great deal of time just explaining what that means. But that we remember, especially going into the ministry, to remember that it has to be a passionate ministry to be fruitful. It has to have a passion of desiring to be with people, to be able to help people, to direct people, and to let the word sink in and become a seed that springs up. If we're going to have fruitful works, we're going to have to need faithful people. And that's what needs to happen. Faithful pastors need to be patient. I think if there's anything that I would advise mostly is a sense of patience. I know in my first parish, I became somewhat impatient because as a young budding minister, I thought I knew it all, or at least I thought I had gathered it all in seminary. Found soon enough that I needed to be very patient in learning for myself as well as being able to advise other people. And that's one of the powers of the pastorate.
There's a certain humility which is necessary. If you're a humble servant and you're coming in, and I think sometimes we can get a little bit full of ourselves. Coming out of seminary, we think we've learned a lot of things in seminary, and we think we're going to come in and we're going to show these people how to do things in their parish and in their community, and we forget that these folks have been there long before we got there, and they're going to be there long after we're gone. And those are some wise words that were shared with me when I was in seminary, learning about Word and Sacrament, as you said, so some of these things are still being taught in the seminaries, and some of these wise words are still being shared.
Well, and sometimes the wonderful laity of the church help us to gain that humility. For instance, in my first parish, one of the things I wanted to do every Sunday, and I think I may have mentioned this in another segment, that I would sit in the chancel and my head would be going like this. And one day a layman said to me at the doorway, he said, "Pastor, do you have a tic?" I said, "No, I don't think so." Well, I noticed this Sundays you get up there and your head is going like this. I guess that's when I'm counting the people. He said, "You should be praying." And he just gave me advice that I sorely needed. My mind should have been in a different place than knowing how many people are here, as though that is the most important thing. Well, so we learn the lessons as we're going along. And the thing is that all of this that we're doing is under the authority of Jesus Christ. We're there to name His name, to humble ourselves before Him, to bow down before Him, and even kneel before Him. And once we learn that, then we get out of the picture. And I think that's good. I was at a camp one time where I heard a prayer. At the beginning of the prayer was, and we thank you for the speaker who is here today. Now, Lord, get him out of the way. And what it meant was, let the speaker bring a message, not him, but the message. And I always remembered that. That made a big impression upon me, that I'm going to be out of the way rather than trying to be the big shot. First of all, I think a young pastor needs also to learn how to prioritize time and energy. When I first started out, I had 6 churches. I had 4 services each Sunday and then alternated others. And you can imagine what that was like. And then put with that 6 council meetings, 6 confirmation groups, 6 teachings. I also sang in the choir. And after a while, Lois, my wonderful wife, said to me, "Dutch, we're going to have to change some things." Well, and she comes from a family that really has ministry. She had a brother, 2 brothers actually in the total life ministry, 3 uncles, an aunt married to a minister, and her father was in the constituting convention of the ULCA in Savannah. So she could give me advice, and she did.
Time is very important, and we need to be good stewards of that time and our energy. And in the interest of that, we're going to take a short break here on Lutherans Alive. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Lutherans Alive. We're continuing our conversation with Pastor Dutch Weber, sharing some advice, words of wisdom for younger pastors. Dutch has been ordained a Lutheran pastor for 61 years, and in those years, you've not only taught a lot of people, you've learned a lot that you're sharing today. You say you've learned a lot from the people in your parishes. You were, before the break, telling us that you've learned some things from your lovely wife as well.
Yes, and I do appreciate that, Tony, because the relationship we had over 67 years of marriage was something special, because not only she, but the children taught me a lot. First of all, they'd say, "Dad, when are you going to stay home to play some ball? When are you going to do this and that with us?" And it gave me an idea that I don't always have to be totally busy about the framework of my work at the church, but that I have to be a diligent father too, and a good husband.
Those are also important callings, are they not? To be a husband or a wife, to be a father or a mother.
Absolutely, yes. And they taught me that and insisted upon it, even though I sometimes would fall asleep at the table because of the time that was taken in the work of the church. But we had a very loving relationship all the way through, and that has been a wonderful help, because that strengthens your own ministry then and gives you the assurance of love and faith and patience. So, but then I do need to go on to tell you a little bit about what it means to start out. My first sermons must have been very unusual. First of all, they came out of perspiration as well as preparation. You begin to learn how to put things together, but to make sense to the people. And this is where I think we need to gain as much knowledge as possible, as soon as possible, because otherwise it's just an elocution exercise instead of a sermon that has life in it and direction. I was with 13 other pastors with Dr. Albert. Harold Albert was the pastor of First English Lutheran Church down in Pittsburgh, and he gathered us all together, and we all had to put our sermons on tape. And so mine came up, and afterward I sat there wondering. He said, "Oh, Dutch, that was a great job." And he went on and on. I thought, "Oh boy, I have it made." And he said, "The only one thing I want to know is, where was the gospel?" And afterward, and I was in my own car that time. I didn't have to take anybody anywhere. He and I had a discussion that changed my whole life, because I was preaching sermons that were probably popular, but were they very good in terms of the gospel? And I think he taught me something. He gave me advice that I needed at that time, and I think the Holy Spirit knew that, and that was one of my most precious moments that I remember, because Dr. Albert was a tremendous preacher, and he preached the gospel, and I was preaching the word of my own word, probably. Or that's one advice I'd like to give, is to remember, whatever the text may be, not to avoid what the gospel is.
We have to be careful of putting our own agenda
exactly
before that of the gospel, and ask ourselves the question, what's God doing here?
Yeah, and then how do you do this with all the activities that are going on? I recall I was on a track team in Steelton when I was a kid, where my dad was pastor, and I remember the track coach saying something, and I want to quote this: "Keep your eyes on the goal, your shoulder to the wheel, your ear to the ground. Now try to work in that position." And it's an amazing amount of advice there, because in a parish setting, there are all kinds of things that are pushing and pulling and attracting, and everybody wants you to be there for them at the right time. And how do you do that? And the challenge is in being totally dedicated, first of all, and secondly, loving your people. Without that, not much happens. And I think it's just we begin to be pastors, which means shepherding, when we bring all those things together and learn how to do it in a prioritized way. Scheduling, very difficult sometimes. and things that, for instance, Lois and the family might want to do. Phone call, this person is sick in the hospital. What has to come first? You know, our joy and being together, or this that's calling upon you. And those things happened over and over again throughout my ministry, and I learned how to, and Lois did too, learned how to say, well, this is what we're doing. We're working for the Lord, all of us. They learned that. It wasn't always easy, and sometimes brought tears, but nevertheless, it was a lesson that we had to learn for our own lives. So while we're yanked in all kinds of directions, we're nevertheless put together for the service of the Lord. And I think that's a piece of advice that I'd like to share, that I certainly learned myself, because otherwise you burn out, and there's no need to burn out. I found that out despite all these. Well, when Don Power came to help me out, he took 3 of the churches. I thought I was in heaven, but he went out and he had 3 churches. But the burnout possibility is always there, because say, am I doing the right thing? Can I do all this now? And the Lord gave that strength that was necessary, and the insights that were necessary there.
With that in mind, Dutch, let me ask, did you in your ministry have a regular day off? Did you have a Sabbath of your own, so to speak?
This is a strange thing. I never took a day off, but I took time out. The reason I didn't take a day off, and it's a fine idea, and probably a very helpful, healthy idea, but I never felt that I needed to do that. But when I wanted to, I could take a day off and not have that guilty feeling. I remember one time I was having a real personal problem in terms of needing advice. I wanted to go, and I drove about 20 miles to a pastor whom I admired and so forth. I found out his wife said, this is his day off. He doesn't see anybody. And I thought, whoops, you know, I really needed him. And I remember thinking about that and thinking, well, while it's not a bad idea, I didn't need it myself, and it worked out fine. Therefore, I was available, and yet I did learn how to say no to certain things, and yet keep my healthy body. You see, I've been playing tennis since I was 9 years old. I never improved much, but I did play all these years. But that became something I could do early in the morning, sometimes at 7 o'clock. I used to play with 2 priests. This was funny because we'd start playing tennis, and I'd hit the ball, and I'd say, 1 for Luther. He'd say, 1 for the Pope. And it was so funny, but we had a good relationship. But that was a good time off in a way, but also helped the body. I'm 90 years old and I'm still going.
Who won most of the time? Was it you or the priests?
The priest. No, I think we were kind of probably the same.
Okay. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back with more with Pastor Dutch Weber right after this on Lutherans Alive. Welcome back to Lutherans Alive. We continue our conversation with Pastor Dutch Weber, retired pastor, wise teacher, tennis player, loving husband and father. All of these are ways that you have spent your time and your years. We were talking before the break about how we as pastors are called upon to prioritize, use our time and our energy in the way that is best for the benefit of our congregations, for the benefit of our families and others. So can we say some more about that, about prioritizing and using our time wisely?
First of all, I'd like to advise any young pastor to take time for personal devotions, reading the Bible, taking time to realize what God is trying to say at this time.
And that's not just preparing for Sunday's sermon.
No.
That's for our own.
This is growing time, and we do grow in the knowledge and wisdom of the Lord, but we need to take that time. In other words, we can get so busy with details of the parish work that the time given when we're preaching God's word, we're moving into the lives of people, and they have this magnificent moment with the Master. But it all comes from preparation. So the priority of preparation, to me, is important. Then when the sermon is finally finalized, what you have is all of this from the background with the knowledge of what your people need. And that brings up another point. Pastor Paul Dougherty was on the staff of the Synod years ago, and he and I had a conversation one day, and I said, Paul, I do a lot of visiting. Maybe I shouldn't do as much visiting as I do. He says, be a dog for visiting. And I looked at him and said, because that's where you find out where your people are. And now your sermon and their needs come together, and it makes some sense to them. And isn't that what a sermon is supposed to be about? What the work together is to be about? So time is of the essence, and we need to use that diligently and devotedly. Anyway, I remember, when you think of time, when we were building we were going to come together at Harold Zion. Harold Zion was once Old Zion and the Hill Church, and we could hear each other. We were that close, but they had gotten separated in the 1800s by some problem. Anyway, the day the council decided, the two councils decided that we were going to become one congregation, I called Dr. Himmelman. Now, he was busy, plenty busy. He was president of our synod. And I called him and I said, Dr. Himmelman, I think we're ready to move into a wonderful situation. Do you have the time? He said, absolutely. And he was playing with Paul and his other sons, playing ball out there. But he took the time to come all the way from Pittsburgh, all the way up to Greensburg, to bring together these two churches. Now, that's what I call timing. In other words, we take the time. No, that's wrong too, because time is given to us. We don't steal time. We just use it, and use it diligently. I just thought that would be important for any young pastor to know, because then they get into the habit of using the time in a good way. I have additional advice to give. Preach with conviction. There's nothing worse than a ho-hum sermon, and I mean that. And what I mean by the spirit and the direction of it, it shows whether you're personally acquainted with the Master or not. And I think that is important. I remember one time the 23rd Psalm was being shared by two people. One was an orator, and he said the 23rd Psalm in such a beautiful way. I mean, he had an oratorical voice. And then one of the laymen of the congregation got up and did the same thing. And it was a test. Afterward, the orator got up and said, Sir, I know the psalm. You know the Master. And what a picture that is. Both saying the same words, and one with great oratory, but the other one with great conviction. That's the way I think the sermon has to be. Not an elocution service, as I mentioned before.
Dutch, in the last minute or so that we have here, any closing final words that you want to make sure that you share with us younger pastors?
Always be yourself. Try to share a loving concern for people. Be available, not in a tower up here, but down here in the traffic, to show that the way Jesus did it. I mean, Jesus was available at all times. And the problem with us is that he knocks at the door and sometimes we don't answer. That's what I think a pastor should be: available, loving and kind and patient. And you put those elements together and it does create a powerful witness for the Lord, and lifts up the whole idea of who Jesus is in our lives.
He's what it's all about, right there. Thank you so much for what you've been able to share today. That seems like a good place to stop. Jesus said, "Peter, do you love me? Feed my sheep.
Oh,
Exactly. Tend my lambs."
Beautiful.
Thank you, Dutch, and thank you for your service to the church for many years and to our Lord. And thank you for being with us today on Lutherans Alive. We know that from wherever you're watching, there's a Lutheran congregation that would be very pleased to welcome you somewhere in your neighborhood or near your neighborhood. Won't you come and worship with us, and won't you come and watch us next time on Lutherans Alive?